Okay, some things to pay attention to with super glue. You want to be careful around cotton. Cotton causes it to react, so if I were to spill it on my jeans here, and it would bond to my skin really quickly. I'm not sure why that is, but keep it away from cotton as best as you can. So I like to use a nitrile glove. It won't stick to the glove to apply this. So the cheapest super glue is the best super glue. I'm just using this because I have a lot of it, but a thin super glue. So the stuff that you buy in the little tubes at the dollar store work just as well as this. Now this is a fantastic glue, stick-fast products. I use a lot of stick-fast glues, and I'm really impressed with their line of super glues. But for this, it's the thin super glue, that's all you need. So, getting started is simply a drop or two at a time. So I'm going to do the forks to start with, so I'll put a drop on each fork. And it's literally a drop. And just start working it in. And I keep it moving. And it'll set up pretty quickly, and the more layers that you put on, the quicker it'll set up between each layer. When you feel it start to set up, you can get yourself started with another part. Now my approach to doing this is to apply lots of consecutive heavy layers. I'm not concerned about putting them on smooth. I'm concerned about putting on a lot of them. That way we're building up the surface. It takes very little glue to do this, so it's not like you're wasting a lot of material. And I go for heavy buildup. Now here's one thing I want you to pay attention to. This is something that's got to be fixed before we go forward. We can see right here. Let's make sure we can see. This white spot developing. That is where my finger touched it. The moisture from my finger caused the glue to turn white. If I were to put the next layer of glue on over the top of that, that'll be a white spot that can't be rubbed out. So what we got to do now is go get some sandpaper. I'm going to go get a bit of 600 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to rub that out, and blend it back in, then apply the glue over the top. Okay, we're back. I'm going to sit down and we're going to work this little bit out with sandpaper. See how this looks. Alright, and as you start to sand, I'm using 600 grit here. You're going to see that there's a lot of fingerprints and whatnot. That's the reason I use a heavy buildup. Is if we wanted to sand that flat and get a good finish, we would basically go back down to the wood. So all I'm doing here is knocking out the areas that got the moisture from my fingers on it and caused the glue to set up. I don't know if maybe at a different rate. I'm not sure of the science behind it, but it will cause the white spots. Alright, so we're not trying to fix anything fundamentally here. We're back to applying it one drop at a time. At this point we've got an even layer over the entire slingshot, and now we're starting to build, and these layers are going to kick off a lot faster than the previous ones that you put down. And if you put too much glue on, you're going to get puddles, and that's not a big deal since we'll be doing a lot of sanding, but that will require you to sand through those high spots. I've got one developed right here that I didn't catch. So one thing that I will do at this stage in the game if I'm in a hurry is I'll use an accelerant. And this is just a product that Stickfast sells, but it's an accelerant. It accelerates the cure of these glues. So what I'll do from this point on to get this finished out, and I'll show you how quickly it goes here, is simply going to put one drop, all that you can work with, and this stuff moves really fast. Work that one area in. I'm just going to do this fork tip and kick it off. And it's just a quick squirt. Now this is an extra step if you wanted to be patient. It's not necessary, but I'm wanting to build up a lot of coats really quickly so I can go back in and aggressively sand the coats completely flat. And that is the key to getting the really deep, deep finish, because you're actually building lots of deep coats. Alright. And the nice thing about using the accelerant is that I can go to this fork immediately, right after that, and touch it again. Okay, so we've gotten, I think about 6 or 7 coats rubbed into it. It's really lumpy. No longer do we have a smooth finish. That's good. That's what we're looking for. I like it lumpy. Now we're going to head into the shop. We're going to start with 220 grit sandpaper. We're going to knock off all the high spots. This is going to be a very light sanding. Then we're going to step on up to 320. Again, working very lightly. then going to 400 wet sandpaper. And this sounds like a lot of work, and yeah, it is, but this is a great looking finish. So then we're going to go to 400 wet sandpaper, then of course 600 wet sandpaper, and that's pretty much where I'll stop. Then I'll go to the triple leaf wheel. There's many variations in between. This is the way I like to do it. So from this point on, the finish is only going to look as good as the time you put into it. And it's really important to be very careful while you're sanding not to hit the high spots. So the corners of the forks, the high spots here, don't sand through your finish. If you do sand through your finish, it's going to be very apparent towards the end, especially when you go for the final polishing. So here we go, sanding time. Okay, so here it is. We're going to do some close-up shots. Here's some stills coming your way. That's after 6 to 7 coats rubbed in really heavy. So we can see in the light here, see these lumpy spots? That's all going to be sanded out. So now we're heading inside. We're going to start with 220. We're going to be really careful not to hit any of these high spots and work through our finish. It's really important that if you don't pay attention and you cut through the finish, it's going to be readily apparent when it goes to the final polishing. So this is a lot of work. Then we step up to 320. Again, really light sanding with the 320. We're basically working to level out the finish with that. Then we're going to move to 400 wet sandpaper and finish with 600 wet. But the key is now is to go get this finish leveled out and make sure that we don't cut through it anywhere. So this is some meticulous sanding, but the result will definitely be worthwhile. Okay, we're starting out with 220 grit sandpaper. You can see from those pictures that this finish is really lumpy. So with the 220, we're going to go really light. It's a feather touch. We're just trying to knock off the high spots. And I'm going to show you some pictures throughout of what I mean by those high spots. You'll be able to discern through the dust and the sand while you sand, see where the high spots are. So again, really pay attention to these edges here. Sand very gently around them. All right. And this will give you a good demonstration of what I'm talking about here. This fork tip has been sanded. So we can see we've got a pretty consistent sand across there. Now we can see that this spot here that's a little shiny, we're going to just knock the shine off of that. All you're shooting for with 220 is to knock off the shine. Then we'll even focus more on the leveling with the 320. These high spots down here on the handle, we're going to be a little bit more aggressive with. So let's keep going. Right. So these high spots on the handle that we had the photograph of, these here be very specific. So point the sandpaper with your finger. The way I like to do this is actually wrap the sandpaper just around the tip of my finger and just use the pad of my finger. Smaller pieces work best here. Another hint I like to drop on this particular type of sanding. Sandpaper can get really expensive, and some sandpaper is worth it, other sandpaper is not. It depends on the application. But I found a product made by 3M, their Sand Blaster product, found at most home improvement stores. It doesn't clog as quickly. CA glue has a tendency to really clog up abrasives. So I suggest a Sand Blaster for this step of the process. Alright, so I'm working on the lump that was most readily apparent in one of the close-up photographs on the palm swell. And again, I'm using the lightest touch here, just trying to hit the high spots, take the high spots down to the rest of the finish. If you get too aggressive, you'll sand into the finish below the high spots, thus making your final goal of what you're trying to hit even further down closer to the wood. Alright. So this really gives you an idea of how deep the finish is. All the glossy spots are low spots around the high spots. All the really white spots were the high spots. So I'm going to keep sanding just as gently until all these little glossy lines disappear. At that point I'll know I've hit a flat finish. I won't go any further with the 220. Okay, here it is after going over it completely with 320 grit sandpaper. So at this point we've knocked out all the high spots. We've got no more what I call shinies, the shiny spots that are below the high spots. We've got a nice consistent finish. We don't want to take it any deeper than this. From this point forward is all a polishing process. So next we're going to step up the 400 grit wet sandpaper, and then onto a cloth wheel with some white diamond rouge. Okay. Okay, now we're down to the wet sanding. So using 400 grit sandpaper here, and just soaking it in water, keeping it nice and moist. This does two things. It keeps the abrasive from being clogged. It also keeps the dust down. But wet sanding, you can really see where you didn't do a thorough job with your 220 and 320 as far as leveling the surface. Because this is not going to have a fast cutting action. So it's going to polish all the high spots, or all the spots that are level with one another. So all the spots that you didn't get down to are going to pop right to the surface. Okay, I've got one coming up right there. So that just means those areas are going to need a little more attention to get down and blend all the polish together. But again, don't spend too much time in one area, especially on edges or high spots. You don't want to cut through the finish. Like right here, this is where I signed the slingshot. I want to make sure that's polished out nicely so the signature looks good. And a whole lot more of this. Okay, here we are after sanding it up to 400 grit wet. So we see some of these lighter spots. This will all polish out on the wheel. This is the tricky part about CA glue finishes. We got a different penetration of the glue into the wood on our first coat here. That shows through from the bottom, but that all really blends together nicely once you get it on the wheel. So you can certainly go a little bit further than this with the wet sanding. There's not really a need to, though. All of that will come out with the white diamond rouge. Alright, so now we're going to polish this up on just a soft cotton wheel using white diamond rouge. So I'll just load the wheel up with that. And this is not a buffing wheel, this is just a bench grinder, so it runs way too fast. So if you're going to use this, it's important that you use a very light touch. It's easy to cut through the finish. So here's where it's really going to start to shine. Let's take a look. Alright, we can see a really nice patina starting to develop there. Okay, that's after being polished up on the Tripoli wheel and then just being hit lightly with a clean cotton buff. So the final step is simply to apply a coat of paste wax, let it harden up. I like to use Johnson paste wax for my first go around, so I'll put Johnson paste wax on it. It's a hard carnauba wax. And then for the second round of wax, I prefer Mylan's wax polish. So this one here, with this one, I put it on and I let it set up really, really hard. I let it go as dry as I possibly can because I'm going to mechanically buff it off with the wheel here. This one here, I just do a light polish with this and then buff it with a clean rag. And then the slingshot will be finished.